Welcome into another episode of Commissioner's Corner. I'm CSBN West Coast Regional Reporter Griffin Epstein, and today West Coast League Commissioner Rob Neyer joins the show. Rob, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here, Griffin.
Rob, the West Coast League's season unfortunately canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of the prominent leagues across the country have been canceled. The West Coast League, though, has had some great success of late. You guys were the sixth most competitive league based on CSBN's rankings. You know, there's so many different collegiate leagues across the country these days, including on the West Coast. The WCL has really stood out of late for attracting some top players, and now we've seen some of them go on to star in the MLB. Shane Bieber and Jacoby Ellsbury are just a couple of the top players that are WCL alums. Why does the WCL stand out for players to now go and play for it?
Well, I think that the fact that we have professional, a lot of the collegiate summer leagues, and my hat's off to them, they are essentially community organizations run by volunteers, which is great. But I think ultimately, unless you're in some place like the Cape Cod League or the Northeast Collegiate Baseball League, where they have such a great legacy for attracting tremendous players, when you look at all the rest of the country, and as you said, there are leagues everywhere now. One of the things that players and their college coaches are looking for are professionally run organizations. And we certainly have that in the West Coast League with some tremendous front office staffs. The other thing that we bring to players looking for a professional experience, we are, I believe, easily the most geographically far-flung organization. You go, as you said, Oregon, we have Bend and Corvallis, which reach fairly far south into the state. And you mentioned Victoria up in British Columbia. Also, Kelowna, which is way up there in British Columbia, at least relatively speaking. So you have teams that occasionally will be on a 8, 9, 10-hour bus ride one way. And that's not easy. But it does create tremendous opportunities for bonding with your teammates, developing that camaraderie. And it also gets a lot of these players a real feel for what their first professional baseball season might be like. So we bring an experience in the West Coast League that you simply can't get anywhere else in collegiate summer league baseball.
Have there been either league or team financial repercussions in the WCL this year that might translate to problems or changes in the coming years? And how have you guys approached player refunds as well? In terms of player fees, have players been fully reimbursed? Is that been a league mandated decision or decided by teams?
Well, there's another thing that makes our league so attractive. We don't have player fees. Like the Cape League, like a few of the other top leagues, the players incur no costs other than getting to their team and then getting home at the end of the season. Otherwise, their food and their stay with host families, those are all covered. So really, most of what teams still have to pay for are their staff, their full-time staff. And our teams have, everyone has full-time staffs. They tend to be on the low side numerically compared to, say, a professional minor league team. So I wouldn't suggest that our teams aren't suffering financially, because certainly they are with no revenues. But everyone seems to be doing well. All the general managers are still employed. I'm still here. I think that there will be repercussions, yes, down the road, whether that's looking at budgets this winter, looking at budgets next summer. But at this point, we have every expectation that we'll open play next season with the same teams we've got now, plus one more. We have a new team in Nanaimo, British Columbia, which will give us 13 teams, and we're all set for opening day next June. I believe it's June 5th.
It's exciting to hear. I bet you're counting down the days already. We certainly are counting down the days till baseball returns across the country. You did mention that there are some exceptions. The Portland Pickles are planning to have a pod league this summer, and the Wenatchee Apple Sox have also vouched to play independently as well. What's your take on them trying to continue to play baseball? And pod leagues have been, they've really sprung up across the country this summer. Is this a model that you think might be viable for summer collegiate leagues going forward?
Well, that's a good question. I certainly think there is no question in my mind that we'll see more pod leagues next summer. There's just so much uncertainty in baseball right now, in summer baseball, when you look at not only the collegiate summer leagues, these pod leagues, and all the uncertainty surrounding minor league baseball, with potentially 40 some fewer minor league teams next summer. So it's an incredibly dynamic situation. Nobody nobody really knows what things are going to look like a year from now. But I would expect that some of these pod leagues will find some real advantages to doing it that way and just try it again next summer.
Wanted to pivot a little bit, Rob, and talk a little bit about you. You've had such an interesting career in baseball before you became commissioner of the WCL. You worked under Bill James. You were at ESPN.com as their lead baseball writer for 15 years. You've also been at Stats, SB Nation, and Fox Sports. Just take us through your career a little bit and your baseball story.
Oh gosh, Griffin, I'll try to keep this brief. That is a lot of years. I don't usually think about how long it's been or how old I am, but I first went to work for Bill in 1989. So that's 31 and a half years ago, basically. And obviously the two big ones that I could spend most of my time talking about and probably should is working for Bill for 4 years. Bill, when I was in college, I was aimless. I had no idea what I wanted to do, what I wanted to be, which classes I should take. I really shouldn't even have been in college. But if you had asked me, and this is literally true, at any point, what's your dream? One job, what do you want to do? And it was work for Bill James. The problem was I had no idea how one would go about doing that, which makes it all the stranger that I actually wound up working for Bill James shortly after I left college. I just got lucky. Bill happened to live 35 miles away from Lawrence, Kansas, where I was going to school and then working. And when we had a mutual friend, and when Bill was looking for an assistant, I found out about it, applied for the job. For some unknown reason, I had no qualifications or skills. Bill hired me, and everything just sort of that led to everything else. I mean, if it wasn't for Bill, I wouldn't have had any sort of career in baseball because I wasn't pointing in that direction at all.
You mentioned working with Bill James, who was obviously at the forefront of incorporating sabermetrics into the game and Moneyball with the Oakland Athletics. And that has really become mainstream now, especially with the technology that can give constant feedback, live updates on spin rate, launch angle. We've seen StatCast incorporated into MLB. Was this, when you were working with Bill back in the 80s and 90s, where you envisioned the game going, and where does it go from here with all this technology and data?
Well, first of all, I wasn't nearly smart enough to know where the game would go, really even to think about it. I think I did assume during those years in the 90s, really it's the 90s that are sort of we don't know what's going to happen years, because Bill was increasingly popular throughout the 80s. And then I joined him in 89, was there for 4 years, then Stats Inc. and then ESPN. And there were all these rumblings about sabermetrics, but it was difficult to see much sabermetrics actually in the game. There were a few teams that dabbled. Certainly you can go back and find stories about this team or that team, but for the most part, the decisions were made in the traditional ways. It was, in one sense, not Bill James, but rather Moneyball that really pushed sabermetrics into the mainstream among the teams, because a lot of team owners were reading about this book, and then going to their employees, their general managers in particular, and saying, hey, why aren't we doing this? There just hadn't been a bottom-up push for sabermetrics, and there hadn't been a top-down push. For the most part, the owners listened to their GMs. Their GMs, for the most part, weren't interested. So no, I didn't have any idea. I thought it would happen eventually. I just didn't know how long it would take.
Where do you see the game going in the future now with all of this technology and all this data at players and coaches and GMs' fingertips?
there's got to be something on the horizon in baseball management that nobody's seeing yet. One of the holy grails for teams, and I started writing about this 20 years ago. I didn't know where it would go, but it seemed obvious to me then and to others that the big edge to be gained was in health, and particularly pitchers' health. And it seems like every few years we see some story about, oh, we're starting to figure it out, right? We're looking at, kinetics and pitch counts and et cetera. But I think that is still sort of the holy grail for a lot of teams is, okay, we have this 20-year-old kid who throws 98. How do we keep him from needing 1 or 2 surgeries at some point in the next 5 years? And they still haven't gotten that down yet.
There may be some people watching, and there's certainly plenty out there that are still very critical of sabermetrics, of kind of technology and data being infused into the game and development of players. What do you say to those coaches, to those fans, to those people that really shun that part of the game?
Well, for the fans, I would say enjoy the game however you like. I don't, if a fan, if all he cares about is who won the batting title, who had the highest batting average, enjoy it. I have no issues with that whatsoever. What I would say to a coach, I wouldn't say it like this because it would be condescending, but if I could give a young coach who came to me and said, Rob, what do I need to do? I would say you need to study all this stuff. You need to know the technology. You need to be conversant in sabermetrics, because otherwise you can't get where you want to be. You can be a fantastic collegiate summer coach and not know anything about wins above replacement. But ultimately, you're not going to find a big separation between the technology, those numbers that the TrackMan and others are giving you, and actual sabermetrics and analysis. I'm not sure how you trust one and not the other, because ultimately it's just data.
You mentioned some of the changes in baseball, the economic difficulties MLB is dealing with, and potentially cutting down minor league teams. Some have looked at summer collegiate baseball and said they might be able to benefit from that, extra teams, potentially a greater pool of players. Have you looked at that? Has the WCL looked at that, especially because the Salem Kaiser Volcanoes, one of the teams on that list, are in the area that the WCL has all their teams?
Well, as I touched on earlier, the situation is incredibly dynamic or fluid, whichever term you want to use right now. Without getting specific, obviously, any collegiate summer league at this point is going to be looking at the situation and saying, oh, there's not going to be a team here next year potentially. That's a pretty good market that's got a history of supporting baseball. Salem Kaiser's been in the Northwest League for a long time. That market is fairly close to our team in Corvallis. Also, not that far from our team in Portland. But we have millions of people in the area between Portland and Corvallis, which is our furthest south team in that what we call the I-5 corridor. I think that ultimately there will be a baseball team in Salem Kaiser in future years. Now, it might be the Volcanoes. I don't have any interest in seeing anyone lose their baseball team. There are a number of fine markets for baseball in the Northwest that don't have either a Northwest League team or a Pacific Coast League team or a West Coast League team. And we have our eyes on all those places, obviously. Why wouldn't we? So I guess without being specific, we're always watching the situation. Nothing's been official yet. That list you mentioned wasn't really actually released. It was sort of leaked. Those lists are always changing internally. So we really don't know. I just want communities that can support baseball to have baseball because I enjoy baseball. So if Salem Kaiser, Northwest League, great. West Coast League, great. Some other league wants to come in. I just hope that people who want to watch baseball games have a place to do that.
Commissioner Rob Neyer, I think we could talk about baseball for hours on end, but we have to end the interview at some point. So thanks so much for your time, and best of luck with the West Coast League going forward. Looking forward to seeing baseball return to the Pacific Northwest next summer.
Griffin, thank you for having me. This has been fun. Love to do it again someday.
That does it for this episode of the Commissioner's Corner. I'm Griffin Epstein. We'll talk to you next time.